I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining me on the podcast again today. Today I have someone joining me whose story couldn't be shared at a more important and more relevant time, and that is Moshe Lavi. Moshe's sister Lishay, her husband Omri, and their two young innocent daughters were woken up on October 7th, 2023 by Hamas terrorists who were pointing guns at their children and held them captive for hours as their family witnessed their community burn to the ground around them. And then, as if the nightmare couldn't get any worse, Omri was taken away from his family and from his home in the kibbutz, Nahal Oz, leaving his wife and daughters in shock. From October the 8th, 2023, right up until today, Moshe and Lishay have been advocating for Omri's release. They're determined to make sure that he has not been forgotten and that he will be brought home. Over the past few weeks, we have seen Hamas release a handful of Israeli hostages, marking important progress between Israel and Hamas as they continue with a Gaza ceasefire deal that will hopefully lead to the end of this very, very brutal conflict. However, I sat down with Moshe earlier last week because he had an important message to give both to me and also to all of you. That just because we're seeing the release of hostages, which is a joyous thing, it should absolutely be celebrated, it doesn't mean that we should trust Hamas to keep and continue cooperating, or that we should stop fighting for the release of those who are still being held captive, and how dangerous and risky it is that some of them are left behind. But first, Moshe began by telling me about the incredible husband, father, and person that Omri is.
He's a beautiful human being with a gentle heart and a kind soul, a shiatsu therapist and a gardener who grew up in northern Israel and then moved to the south to kibbutz Nahal Oz. He met my sister in March 2020, and amid the pandemic, they fell in love and built a family together. They brought to this world Roni and Alma, two daughters. Omri loves sports, loves literature. He's really connected to nature, spiritual person. We really miss him a lot. On October the 7th, Hamas terrorists barged into Omri and Lishay, my sister's home, in the kibbutz. They used a teenage boy called Tomer to lure them to open the door, and they naturally opened it to save Tomer's life. Sadly, Tomer was found dead a few days later. His body was found. So sadly, they couldn't save his life, even though they hoped they would. For hours, Omri, Lishay, and the girls were held hostage in their own home, abused. My niece, Roni, was awakened with guns pointed at her face at 2.5 years old. For a few more hours, they were held captive in another house. They were moved to their neighbors, whose eldest daughter was murdered, Ma'ayan of the Dan family. And then around 1:30 p.m., Omri was handcuffed and was taken hostage with a few other members of the kibbutz. Lishay told him she loves him, she'll take care of the girls, and asked him not to be a hero. Roni tried to run to him, Lishay stopped her, and that was the last time they saw him.
Were those the last words that they spoke together? Was her telling him, "I love you"?
Yeah, and Lishay says that Omri told her he loves her and nodded, and that was the last time she saw him. They were rescued at 5:30 p.m. That day from the kibbutz by the IDF.
And I just, you paint this picture of such an incredible, kind-hearted person, and then you've had to live for almost 500 days without him. What has it been like since October 7th for you, for the family, for your sister Lishay? How's it been?
It's been difficult is an understatement. From October 8th, we as a family decided that we're going to advocate for the cause of the hostages, to release Omri and all the hostages who were brutally taken by Hamas terrorists and their accomplices. And so we've dedicated our time to that. We did not process everything that has happened both to our family with displacements, with the trauma. My parents, my other sister and her family all experienced October the 7th as well. I was in New York at the time, but the rest of the family was in the region. And we haven't processed everything, and instead we focus primarily on the issue of the hostages, meeting elected officials, speaking to the media, and speaking to communities as well. I decided on October the 8th to conscript to my sister's cause. I was a captain in the army, but my sister needed me to be her voice in the US. We understood that this is it's going to be a tremendous kind of work that we'll need to do in advocacy to release all the hostages. I just did not think it will last nearly 500 days, and most likely even longer than that, sadly.
More of our conversation right after this. Many people, I think, at the moment believe that there has been a hostage deal. We've seen hostages being released, and many people think that it's a matter of time till they will all be released. But that's not entirely true. I mean, the focus still has to be on this right now because phase 2 is starting. I wondered if you could explain to the listeners exactly what phase 2 means and where the worry and the concern is that the releases might not go ahead.
Yeah, you painted it correctly. Only phase 1 was agreed upon, and in that phase, hundreds of terrorists of different Palestinian terrorist groups are going to be released. Israel is withdrawing from parts of the Gaza Strip, and in return, we are going to welcome home some of the hostages, 33 hostages, in addition to a few other foreign residents of Israel who were kidnapped and hopefully will be released. We've already seen 5 Thai citizens released last week. But phase 2 is not a done deal. There's so much to negotiate about. It's unclear what are the parameters for such a deal. It's also uncertain whether Israel can make the concessions required of it, whether Hamas is even willing to release all the hostages, because it's the only lever at the end of the day to remain in power, to exist as a terrorist organization, as a governmental force in Gaza. And I'm concerned that we will not reach to a resolution to release all the hostages. I know the Trump administration has been doing an incredible job to continue and pressuring different stakeholders, including countries that sponsor Hamas, countries like Qatar and Turkey and Iran. They all should be held accountable, and they should all pay the price at the end of the day for what has engulfed on October the 7th and ever since. And they're pressuring them, they're pressuring Israel in different ways, naturally. But I'm not sure we'll be able to see a resolution anytime soon. And people must keep talking about the hostages. They must understand that we can't just rejoice with those who return. We have to as well advocate for those who are going to be left behind at the end of phase 1, including Omri.
And it's interesting because you mentioned the concessions that Israel might have to make. And I wonder, one of the big arguments has always been, what is the priority? Is it solely the release of the hostages, or is it trying to maintain some control over Gaza so this never happens again? Is it to defeat Hamas so this never happens again? I know what a difficult, question that is. I'm certain you stand on the side that first and foremost, any concessions must be made to get the hostages back, and then Islamic terrorism is a much longer battle to defeat. Is that sort of where you stand?
The way I view it is that no deal is going to be a good deal to the state of Israel. Any deal with the terrorist organization at the end of the day may undermine our security. And the listeners need to understand some media outlets are trying to paint this as a peace deal or a long-term ceasefire truce. This is not the case. This is a cessation of hostilities and a hostage deal. We are prioritizing as a nation the release of the hostages. It's part of our ethos. I don't think it's the same ethos in every other country. Every country has its own ethos and the sort of priorities it has. And part of our Israeli identity, Jewish identity, the redemption of captives, the making sure that nobody's left behind is really part of our culture and religion and national identity and social contract with our state. When I served in the military, I always knew that they will do everything they can to bring me home, and I will serve as much as possible my country. But people need to understand that some of the concessions Israel will have to make are too difficult, and so Israel will need to receive some security guarantees in order to ensure that October the 7th doesn't happen. We need to ensure that Hamas doesn't remain in power. It's a medium and long-term goal, but if we will not return to the policies of before the 7th, then I think we could achieve it. There were many policies that emboldened Hamas, both by the international community and sadly by our own government. And so I hope we won't repeat those mistakes. But right now we have to focus on the hostages, in my opinion.
You talk about security guarantees, etc., but first of all, no guarantees with Hamas are real guarantees. Are you talking about security guarantees so that countries like Qatar, UAE, Saudi, that they must also play a bigger role? Like where is the pressure? Where does it need to be right now, both from the new administration and from Benjamin Netanyahu? Where does the pressure have to be to make this happen?
I wish I knew exactly. At the end of the day, I'm not the policymaker in the room. I'm not the military strategist who truly understands what's going on behind the scenes and on the ground. What I do think needs to happen is that there is pressure on international stakeholders, and I think we've already seen that last week with Trump's statement. They need to show us, those international stakeholders, especially in the Arab world, what they are willing to do, not only what they are refusing to do. So there is one proposal on the table. All right, you reject it. Then what is your counter proposal in order to ensure Hamas doesn't regain its military and governmental capacity for the benefit of both Israelis and Gazans? Gazans are living under a terror regime that oppresses them. And ever since the ceasefire was agreed, the hostage was agreed, dozens of Palestinians were executed by Hamas. The media is not talking about it, but dozens of Palestinians in Gaza were executed by Hamas for various reasons. So it's for both Israelis and Palestinians. We need to pressure the international community to understand we cannot return to the mantras of the old. We cannot keep funding organizations such as UNRWA that are Hamas accomplices in many ways. We cannot keep channeling money to pseudo-governmental organizations that are not Hamas, but are actually Hamas, like Qatar did over the past decade, with the agreement, again, of Israel and the US. And I hope the US can provide, under the Trump administration, Israel such guarantees that they allow it to return to the fighting if we see Hamas is breaching the deal, would we see that they're unwilling to leave the Gaza Strip and surrender. That's my hope, and I leave the policymakers the ways to create that framework.
Do you think that there hasn't been enough? We look at all of these marches that we've seen over the last year around the world, where tens of thousands of people are coming out to march on the Palestinian side. And I wonder whether you feel that some administrations haven't felt the necessity to push for the hostages, that their attention and where their focus has actually been on protecting Gaza, and they have lost focus of the hostages. Do you think that has happened, say, in America?
I think it definitely happened over the past 16 months. I have no objection to people rallying for a cause they believe in, but there is a difference between rallying for peaceful resolutions to rallying in hate marches. Some of those marches, for example, in New York City, where I live right now, included symbols that are hateful, anti-Semitic symbols, including calls for violence and the eradication of the state of Israel. These sorts of sentiments, these sorts of symbols should not be tolerated, in my opinion. Democracy should allow demonstrations, should allow people express their opinions, but I think there is a limit, and there are ways that a democracy must defend itself from elements that are a threat to it. I know that's not part of perhaps the culture here in the US, but there are other democracies in the world that are restricting some hate speech in order to protect communities, such as the Jewish community, let us say, in Germany. So I hope we'll see a shift to some extent, and we've already seen a shift, especially when it comes to college campuses, with the rhetoric of the new administration, President Trump administration, because we can't tolerate such hateful and at times violent acts by people who don't care, not for the Palestinians and not for the Israelis. They care only to virtue signaling to others that they want something to happen, and many of them are simply anti-Semitic and anti-Zionists who want to see my country and my people eradicated.
President Trump met with Benjamin Netanyahu, just recently. What would you have hoped? What would you have liked President Trump to be saying to Benjamin Netanyahu? What do you want President Trump to be saying in general right now? What's the next step that they can do?
So I was in DC last week. I'm back here this morning as part of our advocacy work with elected officials, and we're meeting members of the administration. We're meeting other members of the Republican and Democratic Party, and our message to everyone is we must get it done. We must expedite it. There is no time for the hostages, and we've seen the scenes over the weekend. I don't know if you've seen the footage of the 3 Israeli men who were released on Saturday, but they were in a terrible state, deprived of food, starved. They reported that they were chained most of the time, that they were hanged at times by the terrorists, that they were tortured, deprived of sunlight. Just speaking about it, I can only think about the fact Omri is experiencing the same thing right now. And it's painful. And so many other men hostages who are left behind are experiencing this. I want them to expedite it, and I hope President Trump, I differentiate between rhetoric to the public and public statements to rhetoric behind closed doors. And I shouldn't be privy to rhetoric behind closed doors. And I hope that what he emphasized to Prime Minister Netanyahu is that he must get it done as soon as possible, that the phases need to be expedited, and that the hostages don't have time. I got the sense from his team that they understand it, that the president understands it, and we saw his comments yesterday that this needs to get done as soon as possible.
We'll be back in a moment with Searching for Heroes. What is the latest that you have heard or that you know about Omri? I know he appeared in a video with an American hostage as well called Keith Siegel. Was that back in November? Have you heard from him since, or has Keith has been released, I believe? Has he told you about Omri or Omri's condition?
So we've heard last of Omri in April. It was April 24 when the video was released. He looked unwell, and we didn't focus on the propaganda words the Hamas terrorists pushed to his mouth, but we focused on the fact he's alive and that we can still bring him home. Keith was with him, and seeing Keith back home, hugging his children, hugging his wife, Aviva, who was a hostage herself and became a friend over the past year, gave us joy and made us understand that we can bring Omri to Roni, to Alma, to Lishay, to his father Danny, to his siblings as well. What we can't share to the public, we try and do so, but we haven't heard anything else about recent kind of proof of life, neither from Keith nor from others. But we hope is still there, and that is holding strong. We know that in November 23, when some of the hostages returned, they reported that they saw Omri in the tunnels and that he gave them strength. He's a shiatsu therapist, and he was trying to give them both physical and mental training while they were held captive. He's a very strong, resilient man, and I have no doubt that the notion of him returning to Lishay, Roni and Alma is keeping him alive. keeping him strong. But we need to do our part, and see him reunite with them.
How old are Roni and Alma? Are they old enough that you can talk to them? Do you have to explain to them what's going on? And what are those conversations like to explain to young children like that their father's been gone this long?
And Roni is now 3.5 years old, so she understands more. She also remembers October the 7th. She calls the terrorists who barged into their home bad people who took my daddy. She paints things from that day. She talks about it. And every day she says goodnight to Omri. She wishes that he returns. We try and document everything for Omri for when he returns. You see what an amazing daughter he raised, and he raised the daughter so much because he let my sister develop her career, so we'd spend so much time with the girls. And we document it, and sometimes we upload it to social media. We created a page for Omri, Bring Omri Home on Instagram, and we show others how they're coping. And so Roni's coping with wishes. A few days ago, she wished to a flower that Omri returns. She's very connected to nature like Omri. Now, Alma is a different case. She's a year and a half. When Omri was taken, she was 6 months old. So we can't really talk to her exactly about the situation. She doesn't remember, or at least we don't know if she remembers what happened that day. But she does know who Omri is. Every time she sees his poster, he's bringing him home poster, she says, Daddy, Daddy Omri, my daddy, Ronnie's daddy. And a few weeks ago, she asked my sister to see him. She was wondering why her father is a poster, because she sees other fathers in the kibbutz where they're displaced now with their children. She sees my father with his daughter Lishay. He's displaced in the same kibbutz. And she asked to see him, and we had no answer. We couldn't answer her. We don't know when she could.
And for a minute, I was going to ask about, have you looked ahead and how do you rebuild? But I think you can't even consider rebuilding while Omri is still being held. And I imagine you would just be in this sort of no man's land in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. There's no closure. We don't know the resolution to this ongoing tragedy, ongoing trauma for our family, which is why the only thing that keeps us going is advocating for him and holding on to the hope that he will return. My sister is a true lioness. She inspires me every day. She's doing so much back home in Israel, and also travels abroad in order to find a way to bring Omri home. She speaks to every elected official possible, speaks to the media, and at the same time is doing an incredible job as a mother to her two daughters. Her strength gives me the power to continue. Her strength gives us all the power to continue. And if she doesn't lose hope, we have no luxury and no privilege to lose hope as well. And that keeps us going, really keeps us going.
Is there any message you want to finish up with to send to our listeners about what's happening right now and the position we're in, and how they should be focusing their attention?
My general message to the wider public is to keep doing what they can. Everyone has the power to do something. And I believe millions want to do something for the hostages, especially in this dear country. Whether it's a prayer, whether it's writing to elected officials, whether it's going to rallies. There are rallies in New York, in DC, in every big American city every weekend. Whether it's posting on social media, speaking to your colleague, donating money to families. Just keep going, keep doing what you can to support us. We see it. It gives us strength. People in Israel see it, and they feel loved and empowered by the work that communities in the US and worldwide are doing for the hostages and their release. And don't stop. Don't fall to euphoria, because as we discussed at the beginning, we're only in phase 1, and we have no idea whether phase 2 is going to be executed fully.
Well, Moshe, we will keep praying as well. We will do whatever we can as well to keep talking about this. And I just want to say thank you for coming on. I can only know how difficult it is for you at the moment, but we are listening, we're watching, and we're doing what we can behind you too. So thank you, Moshe.
Thank you so much.
I just think listening to the stories about how Omri's two children, such a young age, are growing up without their father, and to know that he is being held possibly in chains in a tunnel somewhere is frankly just devastating to hear. And that, Lishay is there being a mother by herself and trying to step in and do what she can. And like, to a certain degree, I feel what that's like a little bit. My wife, Alicia, had to step in for 8 months while I was injured and had to be a mother alone through some really difficult times. And, family can be torn apart and family can be brought together, but it's forever there. So just really hard listening to that, and I guess we're all thinking about them as well. Thank you for joining us today. And I suppose one other thing that I actually think about before I finish is hope. We just talked there. Moshe said he keeps having hope. And until the end, that's something that you've got to fight to keep, and how hard it must be not to lose that hope, but to just never stop for a single second. It's exactly what Moshe and the other families are doing right now. So thank you for listening today, everyone, and we'll speak to you next week. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.